Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing absolutely fantastic today. My name is Alberto Hernandez, and today I would like to talk to you about what I would argue is the most assured and prevailing aspect of anyone's life, and that is change. Now, the very nature of the universe revolves around change as particles collide and join and diverge and weave the fabric of the reality in which we live in. Given this, I can't help but ponder the question, why do we as a human species so fervently resist change? And subsequently, why does this resistance to change make it so easy for us to become complacent in an ever-evolving world? Today I'll be delving into the various mechanisms that actively make us complacent individuals, how breaking free from this cycle alter the course of my life forever, and why it is of the utmost importance for us to diverge from this pattern in a world that is governed by the very principle we so actively try and avoid. Now, to begin, I wanted to start by answering the question, why do we resist change? And surprisingly, the predominant reason is because our resistance to change stems from a biological necessity for certainty. Now, what this means is that our resistance to change is biologically embedded in us in humans. It's embedded in the mind. And so I wanted to attach this quote from Bo Lotto, a world-renowned neuroscientist, CEO, author, and visiting professor at NYU, which I felt like perfectly summarized why our brain evolved to crave certainty. And it is this. To ensure your survival, your brain evolved to avoid one thing, uncertainty. If your ancestors wondered for too long whether that noise outside was a predator or not, you wouldn't be here right now. And he's absolutely correct. Our biological imperative used to rest on the fact that our brain could eliminate uncertainty, because it knew that in primitive times, uncertainty nearly always equated death. And so as a result, we evolved as creatures of habit. There may be a specific routine you follow every day in the morning when you wake up, a specific order in which you get dressed, or even a specific route you take to school or to work. This isn't due to the fact that it's the most enjoyable or the most effective, but rather because when we create a routine and a habit, we eliminate uncertainty in the mind. As Lotto also explains, nearly every decision we make in our day-to-day lives is rooted in millions of assumptions. Every time we take a step, we assume that the floor under us will not give in, and we assume that our legs will not buckle. Since our brain has survived for so many years through the comfort in its habits and its assumptions, the moment that security blanket is ripped out from under our feet, our brain employs any mechanism it can to actively remove us from that situation. What this means is that our resistance to change is not inherently our fault, but rather something we must actively access and acknowledge if we want to break through past complacency. And so there are also other factors that can exacerbate this resistance to change. The first one being intrinsic factors. Now, when we are forced to change, we feel as if we must relinquish control of our current situation. This is because the brain manages us through the control it has of our current situations and what we are currently doing. Similarly, when we are forced to change, our brain often encounters confusion, and so rather than having to face that confusion, rather than having to untangle that uncertainty, it would rather remain in what it knows is expected of it and what it has to do. On that same note, change can also inevitably make us feel less comfortable. It forces us to step out of our comfort zone. And so rather than having to step into that unfamiliar territory, our brain would rather remain in the comfort of its habits and its assumptions. Furthermore, there are also extrinsic factors which can also promote this resistance to change. The first one being that when we step into change, we break the very mechanism that has been keeping us alive for millennia, and that is routine. Now, we may also be offered a specific job or a position somewhere, and we'll be hesitant to act on it, not because we're underqualified, but rather because our brain convinces us to feel that way. And so this sense of incompetence keeps us from going through with that change. Finally, change can often present us with more work and more responsibility. And so rather than having to incur that extra work and responsibility, our brain would rather remain in which, again, it knows what is expected of it and what it has to oversee. This is where my story comes in. This is me in my mom's arms right here. And so when I was a young kid, my parents asked me one day to pack everything I knew, loved, and held dear to my heart into a bag and search for a better life. They were in the process of building their dream home in Mexico, but they knew that they wanted to present their kids with more opportunities and experiences than the ones they had growing up. As I started school in El Paso, I had absolutely no English experience, was able to quickly pick up the language, and I excelled throughout elementary and middle school. But when I reached high school, I was presented with an opportunity that would force me to change. It would force me to step out of my comfort zone, and it would force me to have more work and more responsibility. And so, unbeknownst to me at the time, my decision to follow through with this change would alter the course of my life forever. And so my high school offered what was called a medical magnet program. A magnet program is a program in which students can take extra classes and extra coursework, and at the end, they graduate with a certification, accreditation, some form of title in that desired field. I was hesitant to take this opportunity because I originally wanted to become a marine biologist. I was absolutely fascinated by the sea and its animals, but I knew, and something in the back of my head told me, that if I didn't at least explore the notion or the idea that I might be interested in medicine, I would be losing out on more than what I would be gaining. And so by following through with this program, rather than remaining complacent, knowing all the classes that I would have to take, I actually laid the groundwork and cemented my love for medicine. I absolutely fell in love with the meticulousness of it, the precision of it, the pursuit of it as a lifelong science. And so at the end of those 4 years, I was able to graduate with a phlebotomy certification from the NHA and over 50 observation hours with a board certified plastic surgeon in his clinic in El Paso. I was also able to graduate top 10%, but as graduation loomed over the horizon, I was left with the feeling of now what? How can I take this love, this ambition, this drive for medicine, and turn it into something meaningful for the rest of my life? Here's some pictures from my phlebotomy program. This is me actively performing some blood draws. It's actually my blood in both of those containers, and that is me practicing some of my needlework. And so when I reached the question of college, I was faced with a conundrum because I knew that if I wanted to make something meaningful out of medicine and open the door to as many opportunities as I could, I'd have to leave my little quaint town of El Paso. Conversely, I could remain in El Paso, attend the community college that was near my home, be in the city that I grew up in, with the people that I loved and cherished, and with the same resources that I had for the majority of my life. But I knew that if I remained there, I would not have as many opportunities than if I looked for another place. And so I aspired to attend college outside of El Paso. This was made primarily difficult because of my family's financial situation. I come from a more lower income family, and so my parents had nearly nothing they could provide me with as far as funding for a college education. This was made even more difficult by the fact that I'm a first generation college student, and so I had no coach, no mentor, no one laying the path in front of me and telling me exactly what steps to take to make the most out of this experience. Finally, I had absolutely no family elsewhere. All of my immediate family resided in El Paso, whereas anyone from my extended family resided in Mexico. And so after some investigation, a lot of research, and trying to see what my options were, where I could get more opportunity but still be realistic, I decided on Texas A&M University, San Antonio. The only issue with this was that the cost to attend per year was estimated to be $25,347. Now, this was nearly $25,000 more than what my parents could provide me with for college, and so I wanted to know how I could afford this without, first of all, accumulating debt, because I knew that if I entrenched myself in debt in my undergrad years, I would be drowning in debt by the time I got to medical school. I also wanted to know how can I accomplish this without financially burdening my parents and placing any form of stress on them. I didn't want them to worry about having to make ends meet while at the same time funding my education, at the same time growing a family back in El Paso. And so after even more research and more investigation, I compiled 3 things that were going to help me reach this goal. The first one being scholarships. I applied it to a plethora of scholarship, most of which I was rejected from, but the ones that I did get slowly started stacking up. I also looked for grants that I could qualify and apply for in order to get money that I knew I didn't have to pay back and that I could use to fund my education, not only my tuition and my books, but also my housing, my transportation, and my food, all things that I would have to take into consideration moving to a new city. Finally, I also researched the leadership organizations that were offered at this school to see if they could provide me with any form of support, whether that be financial, scholarship, or even mentorship support. And so after many, many weeks of applying to scholarships and getting rejected and applying for grants, I was able to present my parents what they could expect to pay for my first year in college. And that number came out to be $1,480. Now, this was absolutely tremendous because I had brought down the cost of this college nearly $23,000 simply because I refused to remain complacent and remain in El Paso. It felt as if the entire world and even myself at times was telling me to just take the easy route and remain in El Paso. But my decision to follow through with this change proved to be one of the most invaluable of my whole life. My first year of undergrad, I was able to find a community in my leadership program, such as the President's Leadership class and my honors program. I was also able to tutor foster students for the entirety of my first year for 1 hour every week in whatever subject they needed help on. Finally, I was also able to conduct my own research, which I then went on to present at the San Antonio Symposium and my school symposium, I then took that same research to the Regional Honors Conference in Oklahoma, where I won first place for professional studies. And so I knew I wanted to keep up with this trend of finding money that I could use to fund my education and further alleviate any stress. And so after another year of applying to scholarships and getting rejected and applying to grants, I presented my parents what they would have to pay for my first semester of my second year of college. And that number turned out to be $0.00. This was absolutely phenomenal because I realized this was the culmination of all those times I refused to remain complacent. All those times I refused to remain where I was, and I looked for the change and the opportunities and all the possibility that could come with this. I was now attending college outside of my hometown as a first generation immigrant, a first generation college student, absolutely for free. And this would have not even been a possibility if I had remained complacent starting from that first time I was offered that medical magnet program. And so you may be wondering, well, why is this important? Why is it so imperative for us to break free from complacency? This is due to a number of reasons. The first one being that the very principle of change is what drives the world forward. Change and innovation is what keeps us moving forward as a civilization. It progresses us as a society. And so without those two, when we become complacent, we become stagnant. And so we don't move forwards, but rather we start moving backwards. Another reason this is important is because all of you are the faces of tomorrow. You're all the people who will go on to change your counties, your districts, your cities, your states, your countries, the world even. But without people like you that take the first initiative to do that, we have absolutely no tomorrow to look forward to. Finally, change will always make us more adaptive individuals. It will always make us more flexible, and it will make our mind more malleable. And so by doing this, we flourish as individuals and as people as well. Finally, change may not always be the most favorable, but when it's not, it builds on our resilience and it shows us how to pick ourselves back up when we are knocked down from our feet. And so how can we break this complacency barrier? The first thing is to realize that breaking this barrier is not something that happens overnight. It is not something that we'll accomplish in a single day, but rather something that takes many small battles that reflect as huge victories in the mind. This can be as simple as adding a 10-minute walk to your day, adding an extra fruit into your diet, or even adding an extra allocated time to do something you love. All of these things reflect as huge victories in the mind because we teach the brain that uncertainty and change does not equate to imminent danger. Next of all, we have to understand that in order to break this barrier of complacency, we have to find comfort in the uncomfortable. Now, the uncomfortable is, as the word suggests, uncomfortable. But once we step into those uncomfortable, those difficult to navigate situations, we do the hardest step in breaking that barrier of complacency, and we open the door to possibility. Another way we can accomplish this is by dreaming high and achieving high. Now, not every dream that is high will equate to an achievement that is as high as the dream, but every dream that is low will always equate to an achievement that is as low as the dream is. Finally, we tend to judge ourselves and look at ourselves as individuals with what title we currently hold, where we currently live, what we currently do as a job. If we simply shift our focus more to the future and think, what can I make of my situation? How can I turn this ambition, these goals that I have, into something meaningful? We do the hardest step, which is breaking past complacency and opening the door to opportunity. Now, if there's anything I would like you all to leave this talk with, it is these last two quotes which I have attached, which I felt like perfectly demonstrate why it is so important for us to break past complacency. The first one is from Henry Ford, who said, "If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got." The second one is from Michelangelo, who said, "The greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but rather that it is too low and we reach it." Thank you all for your time.